Hey, baby, have you seen my disco balls? I have about 100 of them right here.
That is a serious medical issue right there, my friend. Welcome to Unqualified Opinion, the podcast that is doing a serious number on my liver. How's it going, Scott?
That's going well.
We are in New Orleans.
Yes.
Yeah, we are actually doing our first ever podcast together in the same room.
It's either going to be a lot better, a lot worse, or you can't tell the difference.
It is a podcast. That's about as much as we can say. So we're here in New Orleans. Scott got in on Wednesday. I flew in a couple days later on Friday, and it is now Sunday. We both fly out the next morning, so we figured we'd do the podcast now and see what happens. Since I've been here, we've been doing a lot of drinking. We didn't realize this when we booked the flights, but Mardi Gras actually takes place over the span of a couple months or so, and it is in about mid-February of 2019, and everyone is in full swing.
What's the holiday? What's the holiday that's tomorrow?
President's Day.
Yeah, it's President's Day.
Yeah, and so we came in at what some people would call the worst possible time, but I'm going to rebrand as the best possible time. So it's been going well. We are crazy tired at this point, so we will see if this is even a doable podcast. But yeah, Scott, do you want to kind of walk through, because you got here first, kind of what you've been doing and then what we've been doing since we've been here?
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh my God, I almost forgot.
Oh.
We need to do our drinking segment. So,
Oh boy.
we're going to talk about what we're drinking.
This is a chore.
Well, we've been drinking a lot, but we'll talk just about this one drink here. There are open container laws in New Orleans, which is great. So we've been just constantly at it. But
It
what
really
are we
is.
drinking right now?
I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's basically just water. I mean, at this point. I mean, I don't have it doesn't really. This specific drink is based on, it has whiskey and some mint in it, but really it's just a refreshing beverage to tide you over until you get to the next beverage.
Exactly. So wait,
It's a mint julep. Specifically, it's called a mint julep. The reason I made a mint julep is when I landed on Wednesday. I was on Grindr and I realized I needed some alcohol, so I went and got the cheapest okay alcohol I could find from the grocery store, which was Jim Beam. True story. And brought it back to my hotel room. And then stuff happened. And then I was left with a lot of Jim Beam. And I thought, what is a very simple cocktail that doesn't cost a lot of money you can make with whiskey? And it turns out the mint julep has the least number of ingredients that you can find. It is mint and sugar and whiskey and ice.
Well, it gets the job done, so I'm not.
So this is the after product of a sexually based libation. So
Glad that our time spent together is fueled by the afterthoughts of your parties. All right, so Scott was here for a couple days. I've touched down on Friday, and then what we've been doing is mostly just walking around and eating and drinking, and this kind of comes back to, well, we go on a lot of trips together, and many of those trips will involve us going to a new city that we've never seen before. And oftentimes our goal is to just kind of examine the various neighborhoods and pop into random places, because there's a lot of value for some people to do touristy things, and I don't discount that. But for us personally, at least myself personally, I find it much more beneficial to try to get a better sense of how people live in a city and what the city looks like.
Mm-hmm. So, Steve, we went. Back up. So, just briefly, if you're not familiar with New Orleans, there's only a couple touristy area, or not even maybe touristy, and nice isn't the right word either, but areas that aren't slumish. No, let me take that back. I have a better way of saying it. Areas that were not flooded during Hurricane Katrina. Yeah, which happen to be the areas that are also not slumish. But anyway, Steve can edit that part out if he wants to. So the areas that there's only like 4 of them. There is the French Quarter, which everyone knows about. I would say it's like Disneyland mixed with Las Vegas mixed with Drunk people.
I guess Las Vegas covered that.
But more drunk than Las Vegas.
Yes.
And jazz. We can get there in a second. Really beautiful area, but also kind of ruined by like people throwing up on the sidewalks, which did happen in front of us.
What's really it did. What I really like about the French Quarter though is the architectural styles. Right?
Very pretty.
So the houses are very pretty. They're colored in a very vibrant way, and they have a lot of Spanish influence, and it's really cool. They don't really have a main entrance, right? And so there are often these gates to the side, and people go into the gate, and then the main entrance is actually in the back of the house. And so what you're seeing is kind of the back, the external side of the house that's facing out into the street. But the other thing about it that's really interesting is that even though they're all very densely packed, each unit is actually very, very large, right? So you got these massive houses, densely packed, super vibrant colors, with the Spanish and some French influence.
And we learned all this because we were behind a tour guide, and we kind of stopped and listened in. So we know all about New Orleans.
Very qualified.
It's a very qualified opinion. So there's the French Quarter, and then that's where most people go. And then you have downtown, which is like any downtown you've ever seen. And then you have the Garden District, which is these, we didn't go, Steve didn't go there, but these big, old, beautiful houses and a lot of green stuff, hence the name. And then you have the name that I can never pronounce, called Marigny or Marnie or something like that.
If you look at the word, it looks like Marigny. But it's pronounced Marigny.
Marigny. And that is it's more funky. The houses are like a little older and more dilapidated than the French Quarter. But it also it has a lot of really neat bars and jazz and just cool vibe. And we can get there in a second. And then there's the Bywater area, which is very close to where we're staying. And that is made up of all these things that are called shotgun-style houses, which are essentially very skinny houses that are very long and very colorful and whatnot. So Steve and I, when he said, we don't like the whole touristy thing and whatnot, we went to the French Quarter, and it's very nice. It's like fun places to go and whatnot. But we actually spent a lot of our time in the neighborhoods around the French Quarter. We kind of like dived into the French Quarter the first night, and we're like, well, Steve was like, this is awesome. Let's go party with a bunch of middle-aged, overweight women. And I'm like, it's a revisionist history here. And I said, no, this is also not what I said. But I was being grumpy, and I'm like, I'm not dancing. And so
that killed the market.
I did, I know. And so he didn't really. That was the extent of the French Quarter. We ate there a little bit and whatnot, but the crowds are like overwhelming in some of the touristy parts of the French Quarter. So we spent a lot of our time in the periphery, and I think got to know a sense of New Orleans that's a little. Granted, we didn't go to a lot of New Orleans that was hit by Katrina, but we got a sense of New Orleans that I think is a little more nuanced than I think a lot of typical tourists get if they just come and stay and eat and live in the French Quarter. Would you say that's?
Yeah,
roughly
I
accurate?
would think so. I think that most people who go to New Orleans or come to New Orleans end up just going to the French Quarter, listening to a lot of the music, getting wasted, and then doing some of the swamp tours and things outside of the city, right? So we were considering actually going out kayaking around some of the marshlands, but we ended up not having enough time, unfortunately, to do that, and so we kind of missed out on that portion. But what we did in exchange of that is just walk all over the area and try to get a really good sense of the different neighborhoods, and they're all really unique and different. So the French Quarter is a lot more densely packed. Marigny is interesting because it's got a lot of different architectural styles for the houses. It's a mishmash. It really is. It's basically take all zoning laws, take all standards for neighborhood associations, throw them out the window, or get them perpetually drunk in Mardi Gras so that they don't know what's happening, and paint everything every which color with different architecture, and it's crazy. And crazily, it works. It actually works here in New Orleans because you just double down on the absurdity of it, and it has its own character. Voila. And it's still a lot wealthier than other places in New Orleans, and very well kept. Except when the parades go by, and then it's like an apocalyptic disaster.
It is an apocalyptic disaster.
Yeah, and so I think that you can see Marigny as somewhat of the offshoot, the just slightly less wealthy version of the French Quarter. Then you have Bywater, which is a lot more hipster, and it was until more recently, within the last 5 or so years, a lot more run down, and is now kind of hipster central, really. And it's got a really interesting character. But then,
But just interjecting, Bywater, I would say the zoning law is more like, do we need a sidewalk here? Nah, no, I don't think so. Take it or leave it. I'd rather put some wooden planks instead.
Yeah. So you've got the French Quarter, which is along the Mississippi. You got Marigny, which is north of that, north and east, and then you have Bywater, which is also along the river, and that's further east of Marigny, right? And we're talking about those neighborhoods because that's where we spent most of our time, and that's the wealthier part of New Orleans. Mm-hmm. But obviously, there's a lot of other stuff in New Orleans. There are a lot of other areas. And a lot of those other areas, and we can get into this later, were impacted very heavily by Katrina. We actually went also a little bit into Bayou St. John, I believe.
Treme.
Oh, Treme.
We didn't get as far north as
we didn't get that far, yeah.
Treme, which is the oldest. So a plaque told us the oldest existing African American community or continuous African American community in the United States of America, and I would believe it because it is in the South, and it's on the edge of this, or used to be the edge of the city, and so you could kind of imagine, well, back when segregation and slavery were occurring, that a lot of the African Americans were living on the edge of the city, and because it is the South, and because obviously there's such a strong African American influence. Just having this population live there for a really long time. Unfortunately, that area is also below sea level, as is everything north of it, most everything north of it. Mm-hmm. So when the hurricane came in 2005, it was all underwater, largely. So we, as Steve was saying, we went up to that area to check it out because there's some amazing cultural institutions there, and just like walking around and seeing this community that's just been there for so long. But you also see these houses. You're walking on the street, and it's like there's no sidewalks, and like some of the areas don't have sidewalks. It's just like you walk in the middle of the road.
Some of the roads aren't well maintained.
There's potholes in the middle of
potholes. There's some gravel,
And this is like what, a 10-minute walk north of the French Quarter.
Yeah, it's
very close.
Yeah.
And you're walking, and then one house will be so dilapidated. If you were in a city, I'm from Minneapolis. If it were in Minneapolis, it would be condemned and torn down by the city.
Yeah.
And here, there's someone living in it, and right next door is a house that has been meticulously renovated
Or completely built from
Or
scratch because a
completely
lot
brand
of these
new.
lots were completely decimated
There's
and people just left, right? And
It's just like an empty lot, and someone built a brand new house, and so it was really fascinating, and it is the most, in terms of gentrification, it is the most like obvious
jarring experience
I've ever seen outside. I mean, I could see like this idea, like the Mission District in San Francisco, that famous gentrification story.
Mm-hmm.
Like I could see that occurring in this area. Like it is just so very obvious. And you have white hipsters, and then you have African Americans who pretty obviously don't have a lot of means living right next to each other.
Can we talk about the hipsters for a sec? Man, there are so many hipsters here. I
God.
did not expect that, but it is something else. I was very surprised when we came here, and it was the whole area is surrounded by hipsters, and I really think that the kind of segregation that happened post Katrina, I think Katrina accentuated severe forms of segregation, especially economic segregation, but clearly racial segregation as well. When you go to a lot of these neighborhoods, the French Quarter, Marigny, Bywater, it's basically all just young white hipsters. It's crazy.
And the elevated bicycles, which are the dumbest invention ever created by hipsters.
Yeah, how do you stop? How do you
everywhere.
get back on?
Yes, there's a lot of existential questions that are raised by these bicycles, and I think New Orleans as a whole.
Wait, one second.
Yeah, go on.
First, to explain the elevated bicycle.
Oh, God.
Imagine
This is
if
the dumbest
you
thing.
took a bike.
So stupid.
Yeah, you took a bike, you lopped off the seats and the handlebars. You took another bike. You welded that portion back on, and then you raised the seat even higher, and then you put a person on there, which probably requires stilts or a ladder. And we would see them constantly. Like,
all of it
I don't understand why people think it's a good idea. It's clearly not a sane form of transportation. What happens when you hit a light? How do you get down?
What happens when you hit a pothole?
Yeah.
Like you.
Yeah.
The movement isn't. It's like accentuated because you're like this high up, and then you have very little balance compared to if you were on a regular bike. And you hit a I was so wishing I would see one of them fall over. I was so hoping they would hit a puddle and go careening, and they didn't. But I'm sure they do, and they do in my imagination. So
that sounds right. You know that a city has become too hipster when you see at least 3 of those a day.
It's bad. But okay, I want to say in terms of I'm changing the topic again, but in terms of transportation, so New Orleans. Another thing it's famous for, and the food, which you can get, and which we can talk about after this, and the jazz, which is fantastic, is the streetcars. And so the streetcars they're a bit. I'm not quite sure what to make of them because they're too extensive of a system to be purely touristy, because there's like 5 lines of them. They go for miles in different directions, but every time I see them, the only thing I see is people with massive cameras and bad sunburns looking out the windows taking photos. And I'm like, has the city invested millions and millions of dollars into a system that stops every single block and takes longer to get where you're going than if you walked? Because there's no schedules for them, so you don't actually know when they're coming. But they're so atmospheric and so pretty. But I look at them and get mad because this is such a huge public investment put into these things, and they're so dumb. And then there's no buses. And in this system, there's not a lot of traffic or compared to like New York or Minneapolis on the roads here. Invest in more buses. There's no buses anywhere.
The public transportation here is garbage. And can I just say my unpopular opinion about streetcars? I hate streetcars. I think streetcars are an outdated form of transportation that clearly is past its time. There's no real value in the streetcar except for nostalgia. The whole point of public transportation is to get you from point A to point B. And it only does it about 30 to 40% effectively. Streetcars are slow. They're stuck in traffic. They are probably the same cost as buses, but buses get you there significantly faster. It's a significant public investment to build a streetcar system, and it doesn't do the job very well. So, let's just rant a little bit. In DC, there is an area called H Street that was historically underrepresented in terms of government funding, and it was always pretty poor. Now it's rapidly gentrifying, and a lot of people attribute that to the development of the streetcar there, and it's now this really, really hip neighborhood. But the city ended up investing millions and millions of dollars into this streetcar that is absolutely garbage. It doesn't get you anywhere fast, so no one actually uses it. So if you're actually commuting, you would take a bus on the same line. And the worst thing about it is now you have this up-and-coming neighborhood that's trying to attract more investment, but they're locked in place because all they have there are some buses and this really, really terrible streetcar. And instead, it's like if we took a step back and we put a subway system through that, then maybe the neighborhood would be doing even better. Maybe there would be more investment. And instead, you have a lot of people opting not to live there because the only form of transportation is this really dumb streetcar. And you know that if you invest the money to put a streetcar in, which happened within the last decade, mind you, this isn't like an old streetcar that is put back into place or anything like that, then you're never going to get the kind of investment for an actual metro system because you already have the streetcar. So you're kind of sidelining yourself at this certain level of development that's totally outdated.
Steve has used up his one rant ticket for this podcast. So
only get one?
You only get one rant ticket, and you've just sold that ticket, and now I have it. So what we've summarized so far, and I need to get another drink soon, because that's more important than this podcast. What we've summarized is we don't like the public transportation. We don't like the French Quarter so much, which is what New Orleans is famous for.
It is an experience. I wouldn't say it's a bad experience.
It's not a bad experience, but it's not somewhere I would want to spend all my time.
Yeah.
I think you agree.
Yeah.
The segregation, the gentrification is not great. The infrastructure is not great. So, we're really selling it.
Yeah.
But what makes New Orleans such a fantastic place, in my opinion, just four different things. One we already touched on is the architecture. It's just beautiful. The architecture is very pretty, and I think the setting. And maybe I'll say three things, and I'll include the river in there because the river, the Mississippi, is so big and it's right there, and like you would get a sense that you're very close to the ocean, and you just walk up there. It's all over the place. You can always access it. There's trails along it. It's very, very pretty setting, very pretty architecture. Two is the food, which is fantastic, and the variety and the seafood. The seafood is so good. And the third thing is the music. There's music and the alcohol. I'm going to say four things.
The fourth
and the
thing
alcohol.
is the open container laws.
And the open container laws and the cheapness of the alcohol.
Just to be clear, so that if people don't know this about New Orleans, you can walk around with alcohol.
Yeah.
It's great. So you can go to bars and they will always ask you, "Oh, is this drink for here or to go?" And that's pretty standard. And what you should do, pro tip, is always get it for here, especially for beer, and then get a plastic cup and transfer it over.
Because they give you more liquid when you have it for here.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. We've learned that. So so the liquor, obviously, and we can talk more about that because there's a lot of funny stories associated with the alcohol, or things we can't remember. So maybe not such a great story. We've talked about the architecture. That's beautiful. There's nothing really much more to say about that. The music is so. I hate dancing. I hate it with a passion, with the same passion that Steve hates streetcars. I hate.
You think you do, but you don't understand.
Now,
for streetcars.
I will dance in certain situations, and I think the jazz in New Orleans is so fantastic, and I will dance to it. It is just phenomenal, especially if you go. We pay like it's a $5 cover, and we got in this band named the Jumbo Shrimp. Jumbo Shrimp. Was it the Jumbo Shrimp? And then a bar named the Spotted Cat. It's the Jumbo Shrimp and the Spotted Cat.
Yep.
And they were so good. And Steve and I, we both play jazz, or have played jazz, and I think just how tight it was and how swinging it was, and just like the atmosphere at the club, because everyone was in there dancing. I've never seen like young women dancing to jazz, and it was so inspiring to see that there's an appreciation for this art form, and it was such a low-key fun setting. And the thing is, it wasn't an individual experience. This is all over the city. Like, you do not have to look for it. You just walk out the door and like walk, and you will find a band that is pretty good, and people dancing and drinking.
Yeah, it really is a pervasive
it's just pervasive
of the culture. Yeah, it's incredible. And, you know, they don't say that New Orleans was the birthplace of jazz for nothing, right? As we would walk down the street, so there's this one street called Frenchman Street. And when we were walking down this street, almost every single bar had live music in it. So as you were walking down, you would hear live music coming out of one bar, and you took a few more steps, and it would be drowned out by the live music coming out of the other bar that you're right in front of, and that would happen along the entire street. It was incredible. And what was so great about it is there wasn't any subpar music.
No,
there was maybe one band that we heard that wasn't that great, but if you went anywhere else, they would have been considered pretty decent.
Pretty decent, absolutely. Yeah.
You know?
Here, there's the context in which they're in. The bassist was slightly off key and a little slow,
which is unacceptable for a bassist. I mean, the instrument that's supposed to be keeping the rhythm is the bass, so that's kind of ridiculous. But that aside, the music was incredible, and I think there are a lot of different forms of jazz. I'm not an expert. But what I found really refreshing here in New Orleans was that there were all sorts of different types of jazz, but the people were very melodic and resolved consistently. And so I think there's a tendency more these days in jazz to push beyond the boundaries and try to create dissonance in a way that people think is creative. But if you do it at too much of the extreme, it actually leads to just very unpleasant sound.
And just to define these terms, so like dissonance is when you have two sounds that happen at the same time, like a duck quacking and a bus honking. Like, they don't go well together. Mm-hmm. And then resolution is when you have two beautiful church bells playing, or a choir singing.
Yeah.
It is very nice. And so in jazz, you always have like that bus honking and the duck quacking, but then the idea is you always bring it back, and the chord progression and the music are playing to like a nice, beautiful, harmonic sounding resolution.
Yeah, and the unfortunate reality is that with a lot of people who are experimenting with crazy versions of modern jazz, you just want that bus to run over the goddamn duck.
It's like, enough. We just want to hear those pretty church bells. We're done with the damn duck and the damn bus.
Yeah.
Like,
so to break this down just a little bit more, you have chord progressions in jazz, right? You have a song, and it's usually 4 different chords. Sometimes it's different, but it's typically 4 different chords that are played in sequence. And when someone solos over it, they transition within those chords. There are certain notes that are allowable in those chords, and the goal is to match an interplay of staying within that chord progression and deviating just enough to create tension. And I think here people do it in a much more conservative way than you see in other places, but in a way that's much more traditional and is really enjoyable for a larger segment of the population.
When you're soloing in jazz, you can basically play any note you want, as long as you bring it back to those pretty church bells in a reasonable amount of time. Now, what Steve is saying is that in modern avant-garde jazz, you never get back to the church bells. It's always this bus running or honking with the goose. It's just really dissonant all the time. And that is, I mean, on one level, that's really artistic. On a very technical level, I mean, it's very... There is some artistry involved in it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about that later.
If you take a bucket of paint and you throw it onto a white canvas,
hey, now,
you can try to pretend that that's artistry.
Well, Jackson Pollock rolled around naked on his canvases covered in paint. I call that artistry. It takes a different... Anyway, this is a different topic for a different podcast because I see this is a rabbit hole we're going down here. Anyway, diverting back.
All right.
Back this way. Forget what we just talked about.
Scratch it, we're editing it out.
Here you have a lot more of the soloists resolving to that really pretty melodic tone than you do in a lot of avant-garde jazz. And it makes it really easy to dance to and to have fun with. I think it's very hard to have fun and dance with some of this really avant-garde jazz because it's like you're supposed to just sit in a dark room with your whiskey and listen to it in your armchair, in your leather armchair.
Yeah, and contemplate the meaning of existence.
Exactly. And this is just fucking fun.
Yeah.
This jazz here is just fun.
It is. It really is. And it's just so enjoyable. Wherever you walk is just an entertaining performance. But I want to shift away from the music and talk about the food. So, Scott, what were your favorite foods here?
So we went we went twice to this one bar under multiple drunken circumstances, and it was just a bar in the Marigny. You pronounce it better than I do. Marigny. That we just stumbled upon, and we walk in, and it was during the parades. We could probably talk about the parades in a little bit, but during the parades, so it was people fucking everywhere. So we walk in. And it's such a chill atmosphere. Granted, it was 2 a.m. in the morning, and 2:30 in the morning, and we walk in, and they're still serving food. Why wouldn't they be? What's the closing time? There isn't any. So when everyone leaves.
Yep.
And there was still 20 people in there, and so we look at the menu, and we're drunk and hungry, and look at it, and there's these things here called po' boys. I don't know why they're called that. So what we found out, I think,
they're
is
just sandwiches.
A po' boy is essentially just a sandwich. It's like a sub sandwich that's made in New Orleans. Yep. So this place though had a po' boy, but it was their own take on the po'. It was kind of a gourmet version, if you will. So they put and this is not gourmet what I'm about to describe. So they take it and they put a fried egg on it, and they put a bunch of shrimp meat on it. And smother it.
No, it wasn't shrimp meat.
Oh, what was it? Crawfish. You're right, crawfish meat on it. And then put a bunch of horseradish on it. And I think mayonnaise or something fatty. And they slop it to you on a plate. And it is so good.
It is the best po' boy ever. The place is called 13.
13.
Yeah, definitely recommend it if anyone comes to New Orleans.
And the bartenders are really nice.
Yeah.
Fun.
So for people who've never... Yeah, that was a really good one. For people who have never been to New Orleans, I think this is pretty obvious, but seafood is everywhere. A lot of shrimp, a lot of crawfish, a lot of catfish. Mm-hmm. Maybe not the healthiest seafood, really, if you think about it. But tasty. It's a lot of seafood, and it's super
crustaceans.
Tasty. Yeah.
I guess a catfish isn't a crustacean.
Also a lot of fried food because it's the South.
So everything is fried.
Yeah. Fried. And I think for people who aren't used to it, they wouldn't realize how prevalent it is. Because for most people in the U.S., seafood is something that you have access to, but you have to go out of your way. here it's everywhere.
Every single restaurant has some sort of fish dish on it that is popular. It seems.
Yes.
It is or fish or like I don't know if is a crawfish a fish.
No, it is not.
What is it? A crustacean?
It's a crustacean. Yes.
It's crustacean-based meals. There's these crustacean-based meals on all of the menus. What is an oyster? What is an oyster?
It's a mollusk.
Mollusk-based dishes.
You are really challenging me
Fish,
on my biology.
crustacean, and mollusk-based dishes. Seafood. I guess they're all seafood.
I guess you could say
seafood-based dishes on all of the menus. and multiple forms. So you can say, do I want a mollusk? Do I want a crustacean? Or do I want a fish today? Or do I want a reptile? Because there's also alligator.
Yes, there's alligator.
Which I think is actually kind of a fish, but we disagree on
that. It's clearly a reptile. That's biologically a fact.
It's biologically a fact that they swim.
That's not what makes a fish a fish.
Lay eggs like fish. And
I really hope you're not serious right now.
They also
Are you really going to double down on this?
Wait, yes I am. I'm going all the way in. And it swims. Not and
you know everything that swims isn't a fish.
Well, it also lays eggs.
Everything that lays eggs is also not a fish.
A duck is a fish. Okay, go on, move on.
We've hit some weird. We've got to a weird place here today.
It's New Orleans. It's weird.
Yeah, this podcast is a test whether or not we should be allowed to do in-person podcasts.
Well, the thing is, in person, I would say to Steve, a duck is a fish, and then argue that point. with no evidence. And with everybody else against him, Scott doubles down. Duck is a fish. That's the name of this podcast, I think. Duck is a fish.
I think that's what we're going with.
I'm not going to scrap it. Go on. What? So you're done with the food. What was your favorite? You talked about po' boy and the fish. What was your favorite? Were you going to say
I would say the gumbo. Yeah. So we... Do you remember the name of this place?
It was like fish today.
It was today's seafood or something like that.
Something like
that.
It didn't make sense as a name.
So we were basically at the edge between Marigny and I would say like the 7th ward.
Treme.
Oh, I keep forgetting about that one. Treme, the kind of poorer area, the lower income area that was more heavily affected by Katrina, and there was what could be best described as a renovated gas station that still looked more like a gas station than anything that it could be renovated into.
I say the bathroom in this quote-unquote gas station had plumbing pipes just laying on the floor in the bathroom. You went in and there was just pipes laying on the floor. It's like,
dude, that's called exquisite realism.
What is going on here? Like the faucets didn't work. Like nothing. Anyway,
did you not wash your hands?
Well, they dripped. It took me a while to wash them.
All right, moving on. So this place basically just had all of their food just out on the counter. It had neon lights. There were no tourists at all. Cheap tiled floors. They had a sign that said that you cannot order with your smartphone out, so get rid of that shit.
And it also said we don't accept food stamps right now.
Right now being the key.
And it was written in really bad penmanship on a piece of butcher paper taped to the side of where you ordered the food.
It was great. It's like if you picked up a standard gas station out of an industrial dying small town and you plopped in the middle of New Orleans. That's what it was like. And we went there because we needed to find something that wasn't crowded with tourists, and this was promising because of all the things that we already said. And so we went there and we got some gumbo, and man, was it good. It was so good. It was in like a one of those
styrofoam cups.
No, but it was in like the cafeteria style tin trays, and they just slopped it up, gave it to us, and it was the best damn gumbo ever.
Styrofoam cups. I just loved it.
So yeah, so pro tip for anyone who's traveling: find the
what was it called?
what was today's seafood something. We should look at it.
It has the word today in it, and not many restaurants have the word today in the title.
Yeah, you'll find it. So pro tip, don't always go to the really common areas or the most common restaurants, because what you're going to get is overpriced food that's catered toward the tourists. What you really want to do is find a place that's, probably higher than 3 stars and is a little bit out of your way, and you'll probably do better.
Steve, and there's like a to-go culture here, and I don't know why that. I mean, it's not just the alcohol. Everything is to go. Do you want it to go? Because what people do here is just like get their shit to go and just wander around the streets. I mean, maybe the tourists. I don't know. The locals do it because they're they're working or whatnot. But I mean, well, perhaps not. But we went to breakfast one day, and they have to-go breakfast that they serve to you in little styrofoam cups that you can take with you. And I had because I was trying to be healthy, although that went out the window very quickly, I had a to-go yogurt. But
I had to-go seafood grits.
Oh my god. So Steve has this big steaming cup of grits and seafood. When they say seafood, it's just like whatever they can grab quickly. It's like, shrimp and crawfish, and I don't know what else was in it.
Can you explain what grits are for people who don't know?
Yeah, grits are the so if you eat a piece of corn and you look in the kernel, like the yellow kernel, right? And you open the yellow kernel up, grits are the white thing that is in the yellow kernel. It's that little white piece in there. That is a grit. Grit, and obviously that's not very filling by and of itself, so you have to have a lot of them. Therefore, it's called grits, because you have tens of thousands of them at one time.
You wouldn't have a grit for breakfast?
And you wouldn't have a grit for breakfast.
Right.
It's like it's like porridge. It's kind of like you put it in a pot and you add water and a bunch of butter and salt, and it turns into this mushy porridge. I think it's really good because it's a vehicle for salt and butter. By itself, it doesn't actually taste like anything.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
It doesn't really. So I don't know. It's just and then so we got this. We sat down because we're hungover, but you could go and take it to go and just walk around.
Yeah.
And there's people walking around with things on sticks and things in cups and things in these things look like bongs, which I think are actually drinks. There's it's fun. And then you walk down to the river, you walk through the French Quarter and look at people throwing up and listen to some jazz and dance a little bit, and then before you know it, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and then you do it all again the next day.
I gotta say, this city, at least, okay, and let's be really clear that we spent most of our time in the wealthier areas of this city, and we're really not doing New Orleans justice because we didn't spend enough time actually looking throughout the entire city, which is really what we should have done. And when we have more time the next time, we will definitely do that.
We only had 2 days, 2 full days here, and so a lot of that was not. A lot of it was spent drinking and dancing. And,
but I will say it was just a really. At least the places that we were at, the environment was just very fun. The people were very, very nice and accommodating. They were used to having tourists around. People were accepting. And everyone was having a happy-go-lucky attitude. And I think with that, we should actually talk about the parade, because that was really the epitome of that kind of experience. And so,
I'm going to go. I'm building off what you just said, and then we can talk about the parade. Because what I want to say is that what we saw in New Orleans, yes, was the more wealthier, slightly more touristy areas in some cases. But New Orleans, in and of itself, is a small city. It is a small city. You can walk. I mean, we never needed public transportation or a bike. You can walk everywhere in the touristy, wealthier areas. It's very easy to do that. If you go outside of it, it's a little bit longer, but you're never going to be walking more than 3 miles or 4 miles to get to anything, because it is very small city. It's smaller. If you're familiar with Minneapolis and St. Paul, for example, it's a third of the size. And that's like a medium-sized U.S. city. It's a third of the size of that, partly because Katrina wiped out a lot of the population.
So you mean that
population-wise. Population-wise.
Yeah.
Right. But there's the other areas we wanted to go to that we will next time that Steve mentioned would be this huge park that was built, I think, during the World's Fair, north of the French Quarter. Like kind of a Central Park thing, it looks like on the map. There's also a lot of amazing nature here. I mean, this is like a ecologically amazing area. A lot of swamps and tons of different animals living in them, including alligators that eat people. And Steve doesn't like the alligators.
Yeah, I don't like to be eaten.
But it's an amazing area.
And that's the thing, right? When you have transitionary ecosystems, so New Orleans is really close to where the Mississippi hits the ocean, and so because you have transitionary environments, you have insane biodiversity, right? You have a high level biodiversity. You have a high level of complexity, and so that's something that we will probably do next time.
The nature,
that a little bit more.
Absolutely. So I wanted to mention that, like, there's other things to see, but it's also a small city, and a lot of it was devastated. I mean, we looked at a map data at a museum of the area that was underwater. It's like over 50% of the city was underwater during Katrina, and like in deep water.
And not a lot of it fully recovered.
No, it hasn't. And you can even see that even on the fringes of where we were today. And we didn't go all the way into the areas that were hit by Katrina, but we were on the fringes of it. And you can tell there's like no sidewalks and mud, and then houses that have obviously, completely fallen into disrepair recently. And it's very evident that it has not recovered fully and may never recover until a significant outside investment comes in.
Yeah.
So yes, there's other places to see, and it's a bigger city, but a lot of it was devastated. But I think next time we not to say that we are proponents of disaster tourism, but I think it's also very educational to go look at and learn about some of these areas, because it is a part of American history to see some of these areas and like how the government failed to protect these really poor areas that were impacted by the
and not just hurricane. Failed, but continues
to fail.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's very self-evident that there isn't, even now, significant public investment in a lot of these areas. And so you have a really interesting dynamic in which you have a city that was devastated, that used to be vibrant and a lot more heavily populated, and people have evacuated. It's almost like a mini Detroit kind of situation, but over a much shorter period of time. So you have a lot of empty lots in a lot of these neighborhoods. You have poor investment in public infrastructure, so a lot of things are falling apart. And what's important to note within all of that is you have a lot of families who live here, who have grown up here, whose culture is so intimately tied to this, trying to move on against the tide of this kind of exodus that's been happening.
Yeah.
But to switch away from the depressing point, we should talk about the parades. But do you want to grab a couple drinks first?
Yeah, why not?
All
Are you done?
I am done.
So we're in an air. I'm walking away from the microphone if you can't tell. We are in. There it is. We're in Airbnb, and we've run out of cups. So, what are we gonna drink? Should we just drink it on the bottom?
We have mugs.
Do you want to pour it? Do you want to just pour it into the? Wait.
What else have mugs?
Mint. I don't like different sized mugs, but yes, we can do this. It's too hard. It's too hard to gauge the
appropriate amount.
I don't want you to get more drunk than me. So
I'm okay with it.
Well, I'm not, because that means there's less for me.
Yeah, we
look out for each other.
Clearly. Yeah.
Off to the count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3,
that
4,
one is going
5, 6. That's pretty even. That's a bigger cup, so it's going to be lower. Oh, he took the one that's fuller. Damn it! My trick didn't work.
I'll take that. So the parades. Okay, so for people who don't realize this, Mardi Gras goes on for an extended period of time.
January to March, roughly.
Yeah, January to March. And during that time, there are a lot of parades. I would say this weekend while we were here, there were probably 4 or 5 parades, right? Does that seem right?
I looked, so there was a lot of parades, and I actually think there were probably over the weekend, closer to 10.
Oh, wow.
But a lot of them occur in the areas, and I think this is amazing and really good, a lot of them occur in the areas that are not touristy. So a lot of them are occurring up in areas we didn't go to, like way north of where we were.
We're missing out.
Up in the less wealthy and totally not touristed areas. Mm-hmm. So what we saw was maybe more of like it could be very different from what is going on, the parades that are going on. Because Mardi Gras is not celebrated by just the tourist area. It's celebrated by all of New Orleans. So over half the parades that occurred over this weekend were not in the areas that we were staying in. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And so well, we only saw one parade, and it was in Marigny going into the French Quarter. And it was interesting. Apparently, Mardi Gras is in reference to a Native American tribe that used to be in this area. And I think that a lot of the traditions have devolved rapidly away from a respect of that Native American tribe. And it used to be the case before there were these orderly parades. In how the notion of these parades actually came about, that Mardi Gras was just a crazy festival. And it was so crazy that a lot of violence would break out and a lot of people would be injured or killed. And so in the 1850s, I believe it was, I don't remember exactly who it was, but I believe it was whoever the mayor, was it? Enforced the fact that they needed to make these outbursts of celebration more standard and more civil, and that's how the parades actually came about, to try to curb the violence and the death that was happening from all the crazy celebration that was happening in New Orleans. I will say it is still pretty crazy.
It's pretty crazy. No one's dying, but so imagine, so you're on, so Marigny and the French Quarter, they're, what Steve calls undense, not dense. I call it pretty dense because I'm from the Midwest and like rural areas in Washington growing up. So, and Steve knows about Tokyo. So our definitions,
Tokyo, so
our definition of density is a little different.
Yeah,
I would call it pretty dense. Like fairly narrow streets, buildings right up to the sidewalk. I would, in my experience, refer to that as dense.
Ladies and gentlemen, there were backyards. That's not dense.
Oh God, let's not. We're gonna have density different podcast. Anyway, so the thing is, everyone. Okay, back up again. Everyone who's at the parade is so happy. I've never seen such a gathering of happy drunk people in my life. There were no fights. People would bump into you and say, I'm sorry, excuse me. And I'd be completely genuine about it.
Yeah.
Like they were so friendly, all these drunk people, and I'm sure some were tourists and some were locals. And the parade would come, and there's no barriers outside of where the parade turns corners. They'll have fences there, but otherwise there's no barriers. And so a float will come by, and Steve can describe the floats in a second. We can describe the floats in a second. But a float will come by. Everyone has to stand back because it's big. But then they'll all squeeze in together into the parade route. So there's basically no route left. And then another float has to come by, and they come out with a sign in front of it to drive people back so the float can get through, so people don't get crushed.
Yeah, just explain.
And sit again.
So there, in these parades, there are a collection of floats, right? So a group of people will build out this gigantic construction, this contraption that will be pulled either by some kind of donkey or mule, or else a couple hipsters on a bike. So these are very big contraptions, right? And for each one of them, then one of these floats will go by, and it will display a certain kind of theme. And
Either
a whole cohort of people will be behind it, kind of representing that theme. And when those people come in, they engage with all of the people watching the parade, and they'll give out different knickknacks and items and yell out things to people, and people will yell out to them. And it's just really engaging experience. But what happens when you have that engagement is people naturally come inward toward the street. And so then when the next float comes up, prior to the float, there are usually two people holding a gigantic sign or banner. And that's to force everybody to step back because the sign has to go through, right? So that way the mule won't kick someone in the face. And it's a really effective strategy, but it also leads to this really engaging environment. And I just want to say one story. We were standing watching these floats, and I happened to be standing next to a very serious-looking police officer, and a lot of people engaged with him, and he was very, very professional, and kudos to him. But a lot of people engaged with him and would give him things and try to make him make statements, and he was very professional about the whole thing. At one point, a woman was walking by with a sign that says "twerk for me," and people were twerking, and she tried to make the police officer twerk, and he would respectfully just wave and say no thanks. At one point, a very sexual float went by, and someone put a condom in his pocket, and he took it out and he handed it to me instead. So
he's laughing when he does it.
It's hilarious.
He's having fun.
It's such a nice environment where you have the police officers just kind of accepting, hey, this is what Mardi Gras is. I'm going to just go with the flow. But the other half of the people who engage with him would just go up and say thank you for what you're doing and then move on. And so it was really heartwarming as well. It just really showed how the Mardi Gras experience was just a way for people to connect and be together and be ridiculous together. So do you want to talk about the floats?
Well, yeah, and I just want to say, sometimes when you have these big gatherings of drunk people, you feel a little unsafe. Like, a fight is going to break out somewhere because someone's going to get too drunk. And they're gonna see someone hitting on their girlfriend, or they're actually I'll blow up and whatever.
Yeah.
There's no vibe of that. I didn't feel it. It is not there. Mm-hmm. It's just so peaceful and friendly. And so the police officer wasn't there to prevent or if that would happen, he would intervene. But he was there to make sure people weren't run over by the floats. That was his only job, is to help people move back when the floats came in, so they wouldn't be trampled under these things that are probably half a ton. Yeah. That was his only actual job.
And can I say about these floats, right? That they were incredible,
fantastic.
Right? So when we say floats, we're talking about basically, I would say wagons that are eccentrically decorated and built from the ground up by just random people who have decided that they want to be a part of this parade.
In terms of the size, I would say on average, maybe up to 12 feet high. Mm-hmm. So pretty, they go up quite a ways. They tower over you. And then maybe, 15, 20 feet long. They're big. They're very big. They're very big. And they have many themes, but there's a common denominator of either sex, and when I say sex, I mean a giant dick penetrating a giant vagina.
That happened about 3 times.
Yes. Yeah. Very graphic.
Very graphic.
And then some very inappropriate language over the top of it.
Yes.
And then, or politics.
Specifically Trump.
Trump or Ruth Bader Ginsburg and how awesome she is.
Yeah, there was one with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It was one of the early ones, right?
Oh, and everyone cheered.
Yeah, everyone cheered.
Everyone cheered.
It shows how liberal the
it's very liberal
city is.
or weed.
Yes, a lot of weed ones. And again, marijuana, medical marijuana is legal here. Recreational marijuana is not. But you would not expect that given the behavior of everyone.
What were some of your favorite float? What was your favorite float?
I think my favorite float was the surveillance camera one. So there was a float that, and I don't remember exactly what they were saying, but it was around like a surveillance state kind of thing. But what they did was, in their float, they had a giant big screen TV. And then they had a bunch of cameras on the sides. And they were projecting what was showing on those cameras, which were pointed to all of the parade watchers.
That was the smartest
on
one.
the big screen. And so it was just a really interesting use of technology that you didn't see in any of the other floats, because all the other floats are just kind of like craftsman designed, and this was built by regular people, but in a way that integrated with technology in a really interesting way.
Yeah, it was good.
And I think that, again, after every float comes all the people following that theme. The people who followed that one did a really good job. They all had these hats with cameras and like surveillance state kind of equipment and things, and I thought it was really fun.
I had two favorites, or two that I really remember. One was Brett Kavanaugh, and it was so bad. It was so bad, but it was good.
It was Brett Kavanaugh's face on the body of a baby.
On the body of a baby, and then on a huge picture behind him, it said "Objection overruled," and it had his hands covering a woman's mouth, like having sex with her. And then there was these actual quotes from the Kavanaugh hearings on the side of the float. It was, it was the most political one.
It was by far the most political one.
And
it also had a sign that said "King of Beer," which was
King
hilarious.
of Beer. It was just that everyone cheered at Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and everyone cheered at that one because it's also very liberal in that direction, because it was just so dissing on Kavanaugh. I appreciated that. I thought the humor was on point, and it was a humorous take on it, on a really awful situation. The other one I liked was, and I don't know what point this was trying to make, but it was a space alien with a gag in its mouth, and it said, "No one can hear your safe word in space." I'm like, what? That's true.
Yeah.
And then there was a bunch of people with like BDSM gear behind the float. And I'm like,
I'm not sure exactly what they were going with for that one.
I have no idea what the point was, but it was funny.
Yeah, it was playing on that "in space no one can hear you scream."
No one can hear you
scream. In space no one can hear your safe word.
I thought that was just very funny and kind of clever. So that gives you a sense of the type of floats. They're just ridiculous.
Yeah, but think about the scale of this, right? Because we're talking about one parade, not even on Mardi Gras, and there were so many floats. I think it took probably 45 minutes to an hour for all of them to go by, and they were all handcrafted by regular people
and
tons of people involved. And this
artistry.
Is happening, what did you say, 10 times a weekend for 2 to 3 months? It's incredible.
The amount of effort that goes into it. And I don't know, there was this is one of those stories that's a non-story because I can't remember most of it. But we were at...
Great, tell it.
I'm going to tell it anyway. So we were at a museum today, and it was like, it was a good museum. It was in an old building, which I like. I like old buildings. And it was like an adequate museum about some of the history of New Orleans, briefly presented by tourists who are drunk. Mm-hmm. So it was like very short, easy sentences on all of the plaques. And, there was an area that talked about very briefly talked about Mardi Gras, and there was a saying. I don't know if it was written in a poem or something a long time ago about the Native Americans in the area who reportedly had costumes during a certain period of the year, and they would like create these amazing costumes. And the quote was something like, "Oh, we're done creating the costumes right now, so we have to start again for next year now." Mm-hmm. And that is the sense you get. Like, there's a massive, and still a massive amount of effort that goes into creating these. Obviously, it's not. I didn't see any Native Americans in the parade, so it's entirely been appropriated. But I mean, these people, I'm quite sure, do live in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. And are native of New Orleans and know some of the history and have some of the culture of New Orleans, and they put massive amount of efforts into these stills. I'm sure take months to, you have to think of the idea. I'm sure they start thinking of the idea the day that Mardi Gras
Especially now,
over.
you have to be so you have to be so creative to
Yeah.
set out.
And then like the planning, like who's going to be part of your crew, as it's called, the KREWE, the crew. And like what costumes are you going to wear? Like what's the float going to look like? What are the people after the float going to look like? Like, you know, it's just, and they're all, you can tell so much thought and effort went into each of these floats.
Well, you know what
and the creativity
you know
is
what I
amazing.
really like about it? It's the fact that if you look at any standard economic models, there's no reason that this system of parades for Mardi Gras should exist at all. It's a really dumb proposition. You get literally no economic benefit of creating a parade. It's not like these parades are sponsored by Red Bull.
No.
You know?
No.
They're not sponsored,
They're not sponsored by anyone.
Oh, top me off too, please.
Yeah.
They're not sponsored by anyone. It's just a bunch of people who want to get together and build something creative, and they decide that they're going to invest an inordinate amount of time into doing it
and money
to make it, and money too. Yeah, they're spending a lot of money on it, and these are free parades. It's not like they're getting paid.
Oh, anyway, you could practically be in the parade. Just walk in and start walking.
Yeah, I mean, we walk through the parade ground and people can tell the difference. But the thing about it is if you look at economic models of how productivity works and how you produce value in a market, this would not apply, and yet it's very clear that this provides value in the market, and people are just motivated to do it based on their culture. And so it's a really clear example of the importance of a pervasive culture, and even being able to say, I think it's very fair to say that a lot of people come to Mardi Gras because of the parades, and yet the people who are producing it aren't motivated at all by getting a cut of tourism dollars or anything like that. It's just based on the culture and promoting that history.
There's been I've traveled a lot. I have, and I get kind of jaded. Like after a while, especially if you're traveling in Europe, it's like one European city is the damn same as another European city. They're all old.
Shots fired.
Well, they're pretty similar.
Think about all of our 0 European subscribers that you might be pissing on.
I'm sorry, European subscribers. I'm sorry about all your nationalism. But I mean, it's like it's old. It was all developed during the same period. It all kind of looks the same. And in America as well. Like you go to these big cities. You go to LA, you go to New York, you go to San Francisco. Yeah, they look different, but generally, you can get kind of the same vibe out of them, right? I have never been to a city in the U.S. that is as different from the rest of the U.S. as New Orleans. And I'm not quite sure if there's maybe some cities in Alaska, quote-unquote cities, or like Alaska in general. But I have never been to a U.S. city that is so, especially during Mardi Gras, and I think that's part of the reason, that's so different than the rest of the country. It is so different for me. I came in jaded, and I'm leaving, and I'm like, I want to come back here. I don't say I want to come back to... I've been to Miami. I don't say I want to come back to Miami. I've been to Denver. I'm like, yeah, I could go back to Denver. I don't really want to go back. I mean, sure. If I end up back there, that's great.
You're really throwing hate on a lot of people right now. You're just dissing a lot, just going back and forth to any places. But no, I get what you're saying.
You get what I'm saying? I mean, they're all great cities. I mean, I would live in Denver. I would live in Miami. I think they're fun and amazing places to live. But if I was a tourist as well, like, would I come back to Minneapolis because of all the amazing tourist sites and culture it offers? No. It's Minneapolis. But it's a good place to live.
I would say...
Right? But New Orleans is different.
I would say the only place that is on par, in my experiences, are certain places in Hawaii. Especially if you're talking about urban areas. I mean, Honolulu is... not as unique as a lot of other places in Hawaii, but it's a good first step for someone who's never been to Hawaii. So I do get a lot of the similar vibe in which what you feel is there is an underlying culture there prior to like this really rough notion of like quote unquote Americanization, right? And so in New Orleans, so I think people understand in Hawaii there was already a native population and it was colonized very, very late. And so while the native population doesn't have as much significance anymore. There's still an underlying culture that's pretty pervasive. In the same way, New Orleans was originally, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, was a French settlement, was then
Spanish.
sold to the Spanish, and then from there
went back to the
went
French.
back to the French because of Napoleon, and then Napoleon sold it in the Louisiana Purchase to the U.S. And so there is a heavy underlying history around French and Spanish influence, and the Creole population, which, and correct me if I'm wrong again, Creole I think is basically just a shorthand term for people prior to like American that Americans coming in. So French and Spanish people who live there.
Actually, so I read something just like today. There's Creole. What is the other? This is gonna have to be edited out because I can't remember what the fuck its name is. There's Cajun, Creole and Cajun. People think they're the same.
They're not.
I just read today. Cajun is very rural.
Yeah.
And Creole is very urban. I just learned that. So I'm not sure if it's like this. I think there's some differentiation between, like, is it just people who were here before America? I think there's a very definitive culture.
So
Okay, go on.
I'm going to get a lot of hate from the one subscriber that we have here. But if you are not Cajun and you try to hear someone who's like heavily Cajun speak, you cannot understand what they say. I'm serious. Like, dude, it does not.
Damn, see if we have a lot of Cajun subscribers.
Like English. I am serious. Like, it is indecipherable from mumbling. So, that's a really politically incorrect thing to say. But I'm gonna okay.
Double down on that,
no,
Steve.
No. Let me go back to what I was trying to say.
Okay. Go back.
Yeah, which is that I think what Scott was talking about with this feeling like a very unique place in the U.S. stems from the fact that it has a deep history prior to becoming an American city. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's why, to me, when I think back, and I lived in Hawaii for 3 years as I was growing up, I think back and it reminds me in a lot of ways of Hawaii in that it feels half American. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what it comes out to.
I think if you were a space alien coming in and you didn't see any cities or like where the center of the populations were in North America, in all of North America, and you said, okay, you need to pick the most strategic spot. If people travel by boats, which they did in the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 1900s, pick the most strategic spot in the entire North American continent.
And you would say
You'd pick New Orleans. Because New Orleans is the gateway to the Mississippi River, which with its tributaries is within like 100 miles of a vast swath of land. I mean, massive swath of land. That's why there is a city here, is because it controls the Mississippi River.
And it still does.
And you can see that. You walk out. There was actually a boat. You probably can't hear it on the podcast, but there was a boat a little while ago that was honking its horn on the river, which is like half a mile from here. And these are big container ships.
Yeah.
And it still does. You see tons of traffic coming up and down this river.
And what are you saying, Scott, that it's also a connection to railway systems? So it's a transition point between waterways and railways.
Exactly. So, a lot of goods would come into New Orleans, or if the goods are produced in like Texas or anywhere in the southern United States, cheapest way to travel, of course, is by water. It is the cheapest way to travel. Even today, it is the cheapest way to travel. So you bring in by land everything in Texas and Florida and all the South that's close by rail into New Orleans. You transfer it onto barges and you ship it up. You get to Chicago, you get to Minneapolis, you get to Kansas City, Omaha, and St. Louis. And you have to understand a lot of these cities now they're kind of smaller. Back in the day, they used to be huge. I mean, St. Louis used to be the gateway of the West. It was a massive city.
Yeah, they're still trying to pitch that idea. It's not going.
Not anymore, but it used to be a huge city.
Yes, it did.
And vice versa. So then if you have a bunch of grain and all the kind of agriculture products the Midwest grows, all goes on a barge to the Mississippi, floats down, gets on trains in New Orleans, gets shipped to places south, even like Texas and Mexico. It goes down to Mexico.
Yeah.
So it is a huge transfer zone for all different modes of transportation, which is, I think, as a driver, is really interesting.
Yeah, in which is a clear indication of why there were such early settlements by the French here. Right?
Even by Native American communities here, because they also can use that. You travel up the river. There's very little rapids on the Mississippi. It's a very smooth river. Mm-hmm. So you can travel up and down the Mississippi in canoes much faster and like easier than you can like travel like overland through woods, right?
Of course, yeah.
So, I mean, it just is a very strategic spot in the American continent. And I also like it because I live in Minneapolis, which is, and Minnesota is where the Mississippi starts. And the Mississippi is integral to life in Minneapolis. I mean, the Mississippi River
really
is everywhere. I live by the Mississippi. You have parks. I run by the Mississippi all the time. And now I'm here, and here's where the Mississippi enters and ends into the ocean. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of feel, I don't know, this is kind of like soporific, but I feel I have a connection to it. It's like, it's the same water that came from, you know, maybe not because it comes from different tributaries, but, you know, it's the same river that flows all the way from northern Minnesota, where I live, out, you know, and it's like 50 degrees warmer here, which is nice.
Yeah.
That's another thing that's really nice about New Orleans.
Very warm.
The fifth thing, the temperature.
The temperature, it's great. It's
great.
February right now, and it is t-shirt weather. So,
it is t-shirt weather.
For anyone,
almost like too hot. I at points today, I'm like, I just want to take my shirt off and I go dunk in a pool.
He does that regularly.
I do. So.
So.
I find it hard to keep my shirt on sometimes.
Oh, that's
well,
great.
it finds itself hard to keep on. It just kind of unbuttons itself.
Sure, that's how it happens.
So I'd say, the last thing I would say, go back to the fact that I don't like to dance, and New Orleans makes me want to dance. It's a fun city, and I'm someone who hates dancing, and I want to dance in this city. It is fun. It is just a fun place to be. So I would say if you're a introvert and you like jazz and don't like clubs, try going. The club was called this is my last piece of advice. The Spotted Cat. It's a pretty well-known jazz club, bar, hole in the wall thing in New Orleans. Pop in when the Jumbo Shrimp are playing. Grab a couple of drinks.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, it'll be 2:00 in the morning. It's a lot of fun.
It really is. New Orleans is an incredible place. We had a great time here. We hope that you guys can live vicariously through us and have at least a, you know, not a terrible time. And you guys come to the city. All right, Scott. Gotta fly out. I will talk to you next week.
And Steve right now is just hovering over the stop button on the podcast. All right, Steve. Hit the stop button.
Hitting it.